Welcome to the Lighthouse Financial Advisors Money Over 50 podcast with Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Lighthouse Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50. I'm Michael Hogue, here with Dallas Davison today. Today's topic is active management versus index management. First of all, welcome, Dallas. It's good to have you back in the podcast booth.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. Good to be back. We've recorded one podcast since we've been back in, and apparently I didn't argue with you enough. You wanted some more pushback, so hopefully I'll be able to give you some of that today.
If you haven't listened to it already, go back and listen to What Are You Worried About? Our most recent podcast. Look, at the back of that podcast, I did mention that it's been a while since Dallas and I have recorded a podcast together because we have had some guest podcasters on. Maria Pandale and Kathy Boyce, over 4 podcasts. So it's been a while since we've I did happen to mention that I think I missed arguing with Dallas on the podcast because both Kathy and Maria were far too nice to argue with me. So
that's not often something that people say to me, is that I'm too nice and don't argue enough. So hopefully I should be able to give you some of that.
Excellent. Let's debate something.
So when you talk about active management versus index management, we actually already started debating about what to call this podcast, because what we're talking about there is the style of management of an investment fund, if that makes sense. And so historically what that's been referred to as active management versus passive management, or index funds or index management. Can you explain a bit about the difference between those two?
I can. So just imagine for a second your superannuation fund is invested into a mix of Australian companies, and it's invested into a mix of international companies. So you own a bunch of companies spread around the world. Let's imagine for a second just the Australian companies while we do this example. There's 2 main methodologies we can select when investing across those Australian companies. Number one, we could actually choose to seek what they call an active manager or active managers, which is more common. So it's more common to have one. Those particular methods of investing will typically spread your money across somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 companies inside all of the available companies, of which there are about 1,500 publicly listed companies in Australia. So what Active Manager A is attempting to do is select the best 30 to 40 companies that they think, for whatever reason, will perform above average in relation to all of those other companies. It's then common to tack on other active managers because they do get it wrong. So Active Manager B will select perhaps another 30 to 40 companies, even though there will be some overlay and some crossover there. So, if you're investing, let's just use $500,000 as an example, then it would be common to see an active strategy that might select 10 active managers and place $50,000 with each of those managers. And they will invest into what they believe to be companies that have a high chance of outperforming the average of all of those companies.
And I think that's what we tend to find is people tend to think that that's what we do. That I think it probably makes their job sound a lot more exciting than what it is. Is that we're sitting here, looking at charts and things and picking up the phone and ringing up to yelling to buy this and sell this, or we're on some trading floor or something like that. And that's kind of I mean, it's not actually how it happens, but that's, I think, what people instinctively feel like a financial advisor does is what we would actually say an active investment manager does, which is that they've got a mandate of, I'm giving you this money to invest in Australian shares, and usually they have a bit more of a specific sort of, I guess, where they see their edge. They might say, I'm going to buy growth companies that I think have a high likelihood of growing significantly in the short term, or things like that. But you're basically giving that money to someone who says, I think I can pick and choose which companies are going to outperform on average, that are going to have a higher return than the other average companies, or that I think I know which sectors are going to outperform, or some variation of that.
That's correct. So it really comes down to a human being or a group of human beings' judgment calls, as what they see may outperform for whatever theory that they have. The second methodology, and it's the methodology that we prefer, is called the index manager methodology. And essentially what that fund will do is it will just track a common index. So in Australia, if we're looking at Australian companies, the ASX 200 is probably the most well-known index, and it's very common if you're investing through an index methodology to invest in a fund that tracks the ASX 200. Now, what that fund does, it just goes out there and simply buys the top 200 companies in this. So it spreads your money across those 200 companies. Look, if we're looking at statistics, those 200 companies make up something like about 90% of the value or the net worth of all of the companies that are publicly listed on the Australian. So I mentioned before there's about 1,500 companies on the listed in Australia, public companies. So the largest 200 of those companies equate to about 90% of the value of all of those 1,500. So if you invest into an index fund that tracks those 200 companies, then effectively you've bought into 90% of the value of the entire every single company listed on the Australian market.
And so that's, I guess, in simple terms, if you, again, going back to imagining the investment manager themselves, if you think of investment manager A and investment manager B, so investment manager A, who's an active manager, effectively what you've got is you're going to him with your money and saying, here's my money, I want you to invest that in the companies or sectors that you think are the best bet, I guess, at this stage, based on their knowledge. Investment manager B, who is the index fund manager, which we said management's probably not the right word, because they're not necessarily selecting in the same ways, that they're more an administrator, where you're saying to them, here's my money, I want you to go and invest that across the top 200 companies in Australia on a market cap weighted basis. So as you said, investing in those companies gets you a good spread across pretty much all of the market of Australian companies. But there isn't the same, I guess, thought process of that manager or that administrator doesn't have to go, do I think this company is going to be perform well in the future? Do I think they're going to grow? They're just automatically spreading that money out across those companies.
They are. So let's have a talk about how those 200 companies exist for a start. So the collective market participants, which is anyone that currently owns any Australian companies, and anyone that's thinking of buying Australian companies, and anyone that is buying Australian companies, all of those market participants decide upon the price of each and every company, because the price is ultimately set by, it's set by obviously the fundamentals of the company and how profitable they are, and what their chances are of, we could borrow down, but what sets the price on that particular day is what people are prepared to sell that company for, and what other people are prepared to pay to buy that company. So I mean, that really sets the value of all of those companies in Australia. So market participants set that. It's not one human being that sets that. So those 200 companies are the top 200 because everyone that's a participant in the market has basically said we've decided that that's what they're worth, and that there's so many factors that go into that.
So with that, we probably should explain that a bit more. When we say the top 200, what we're referring to is the biggest companies in Australia by what they call market capitalisation. So basically the value of that company. So if you've got 100 million shares of a company, and there's the current share price is $1 per share, the valuation of that company is effectively $100 million.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so when we're talking about the top 200 in this case, or when we look at these indexes, they're weighted based on the market capitalisation of each of those individual companies, which, as you say, the market capitalisation, or the valuation of the entire company, is based on people buying and selling shares in that company. And overall, basically all the participants in that market are effectively deciding with their wallet as to what they're willing to pay for that, what they think that company would be worth if you were to buy the whole lot of it, basically.
That's right. Yeah, that's how it's. They're effectively valued, those companies, and decided.
I think that's probably a good point to make just in general, is that we see a lot of it is that it's easy to remove or to forget that there is a fundamental valuation that goes on with if you have BHP shares that are $36 per share, that's ultimately meaningless unless we know how many shares are outstanding, and you can basically then multiply that out to go, this is what on average people in market participants think that this company is worth based on its profitability, future prospects, all those kinds of things. And so I guess to come back to what we're talking about with the difference between an index style approach versus an active manager, is that people like us who believe in an index style approach, is that we're basically saying it's a bit of the wisdom of the crowds, where we're saying that of all of the people who have any sort of exposure to the Australian share market and to these Australian companies, there's very intelligent people out there who are trying to pick and choose if there's any arbitrage between what a company is currently priced at and what the true value of that is. And so what you find, especially in these big companies, is that there are so many people looking at them and so many active managers out there that they're effectively doing the work for you, where all of these different active managers are trying to decide what they think that company is valued at. And in an index style approach, you basically just come in and go, well, if that's what the market is valuing that company at, that's probably a pretty good proxy for what it's truly worth in the short term. And so what then happens is that effectively you've got your money with the index manager, it just automatically gets allocated to each of those companies in order of their size, effectively.
Yeah, so I mean, I like to think of it also as you cannot be any more diversified than owning an index, because besides the fact that you're invested across, in this example, 200 companies, if you look at the collective value of those 200 companies in relation to the overall value of all of the publicly listed companies, it's somewhere up around the 90%. So effectively you can invest in the entire. You can invest in every single company by holding 200. You could own 20 different active funds and spread, in this example again, your $500,000 across 20 different active funds. So you'd be putting $25,000 with each fund manager. Look, you would not be as diversified as owning one index fund with 200 companies. The reason being is a lot of those active fund managers are scared to hold anything that is too far out of whack with what their competitors are holding. So, you'll find that there's a double up of so many companies that they actually own in their active fund, because they to an extent are scared that if they are not holding similarly to what their competitors are holding, they may get it wrong, and all their competitors appreciate and outperform them, but they don't.
And that's the old saying from the stockbroker days, was that people used to say, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, and that was when IBM was the big company, the big tech company. And the theory there was, who knows how they are actually going to perform? But if I tell my clients, if you're an active manager and you invest your clients' money into IBM, it's very easy to turn around and defend that position and say, okay, well, of course I would invest in IBM. Everyone was doing it. And
yes.
So, as you say, even though you might have 10 active fund managers and try and be diversified in that way, what you're going to have is that sort of herding instinct of no one wants to be left out as the weirdo that's buying strange companies that they can't easily defend, and so obviously everyone's sort of doing the same thing in a lot of cases.
That's right. Yeah. So they are doing quite a lot of the same thing. Again, going back to the point, you can't be any more diversified than owning an index fund because it spreads it across essentially everything by weighted average. Number two is that if we look collectively at active funds, there's not only no value created, collectively there's less than zero value created. So statistically, what you'll see is that if you hold again using this example, if you hold the ASX 200 and the ASX 200, which we refer to as the entire market, does a 10% return for that particular year, it's mathematically impossible for all of those active funds to outperform that. What you'll find is there'll be some that are above 10% and there'll be others that are below 10%. Now the problem is picking the ones that'll be above. Inevitably what happens is people are scared to put all their eggs in one basket. They spread that across 10 different active funds. 4 of them may be above the 10%, but 6 of them below. When you then look at the cost overlay, so these funds, the active funds, are much more expensive. Look, what it requires, like we said, it's a human being or human beings judgment calls.
Even if that judgment call is to write a computer program that then finds all these different trades, it's still, at the end of the day, there is a person trying to make a decision on that.
It's an added cost. And when you look at the added cost in over and above what a typical index fund will charge you, look, this is a low range, but it's at least 1%. So again, using that example, if active fund A, B and C are going to charge me an extra 1%, then it costs me in management fees for an index fund, and the index fund does 10% for the year, then all of those funds to outperform after fees have to actually give me 11%. So when we look at that, hey, it was 4 out of the 10 that were in this example, above 10%. There's only 1 out of 10 that's above 11%. So when you look at it collectively, look, the collective results every single year are that if you add up every single active fund on the market, then collectively, and this accounts for the middle of the range performers, the great performers, the good performers and the poor performers, collectively, after you've factored in the extra fees that they charge, they collectively underperform the index every single year.
And that's, I guess, like you were just saying, that's just it's mathematically impossible for the average of those performers to be better than the average, if that makes sense. So for everyone who's buying a company, every one of these active managers who's buying a company at a certain price, he's buying it from someone. So someone is selling it to him. So that manager may well outperform, but the person that he's bought that company off has to underperform. It's just simple maths.
That's right.
Not in the same way that everyone can't be above average. That's by its very definition what average is.
That's right.
In your example there, where you're saying, if 4 out of 10 of your active managers outperform, in that case, you're going to be worse off, even without the effective fees. But even if you were to say 5 out of your 10, so half of your managers outperform, and half of them underperform, even if you were to do that, which is the average, that's kind of where your cost comes into it. And you go, well, even if half of them get better than 10%, half of them get worse than 10%, so I've broken even, then you've got that extra layer of, well, it's cost me an extra 1% to get that same return. So my net return is actually down based on that.
That's right.
So, and I guess that's it's like anything. If you had a crystal ball and you knew which fund managers were going to outperform, then it'd be an easy game, because you'd just go, well, I'm only going to invest with the guys who are going to get me a better return than the average by more than what their fee is. So
yes,
someone says my fees, I'm gonna charge 2% as a fund manager fee, and we think that the average return is going to be 10%. They need to get at least a 12% return. And so in that case, if you knew in advance that they were going to be able to do that, then it'd be easy, because you would just invest with those people who are going to outperform. But I guess this is at the very least our belief, and what makes logical sense to me is that we don't know in advance who those fund managers are going to be.
We don't, and no one on earth does.
No.
Either. So, so it's not just us.
No, and that's, I guess, one where the example that we use is if you could have identified Warren Buffett 50 years ago and invested with him, and he has actually outperformed over a very long time, then that's great. But the likelihood of that happening is a bit like me going to the races in a few weeks' time and backing every winner on the cards. It might happen, but it's probably not going to happen. So,
and the other point while you're on that, probably the biggest one, Dallas, is that it's the time that's taken to actually try and pick these theoretical outperformers. Really detracts from the real valuable story. So we see a lot of financial advisors who believe that their value add is to try and pick active funds that are outperforming the that are going to outperform. So most of their progress meetings with their clients are them discussing, okay, well, these funds have outperformed, these haven't. Let's move money out of these ones that have underperformed and into the ones oftentimes that have. We feel they're missing out on the true valuable work. So we'd rather take that time to become taxation experts, which we've become, of course, so that, because we know that the average couple coming in to see us for the first time is leaving somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 of tax on the table every year before they come and see us. So we'd rather become experts at that and actually say, okay, well, if we can pick up an extra $7,000 to $10,000 in tax savings, that's a guaranteed return for us.
That's something we can. We know that the average couple coming in to see us at somewhere in the vicinity of 53, 54 years of age are on track to be more than likely about $500,000 short of where they need to be by the day that they retire. So, we'd rather spend the time on actually saying, okay, what's the best strategy to actually get us, to get them there, to help get them there. Rather than talking about which active fund may outperform the next. And that's actually, it ties in exactly with our last podcast about what are you worried about. This, to me, the active manager trying to pick and choose which active fund manager is going to outperform falls really into the category of something that you can worry about, but to no real avail. So of the two things that we sort of spoke about, that if you're going to worry about something as it relates to your retirement planning, you want it to be something that really matters and something you can control. So, like I say, it would be really really important if you could outperform on average over the next 10 years, and if you could pick up extra percentages of return every year, that would be great. But you fail the second test there, which is that it's not something we can control. We can't consistently pick and choose who is going to outperform. And so you then, as you say, it's really a waste of our time and our clients' time to try and sit there and go, well, we think maybe this fund manager will outperform this other one, but we're just going to have to do it, and then in a year's time, it either will have happened or it won't have happened. But it's all time and mental energy that the client has spent thinking about that rather than, like we said, our savings rate, or am I putting enough money into my super fund every fortnight? Am I picking up every dollar of tax savings that I can? Am I doing everything I can to be the, add the most value in other ways that we really can control?
It's a great point, because the assumption is that if you can pick funds that outperform, somehow you'll meet all of your financial objectives.
Yeah.
But we know that even if you could and you can't, and we can't, and it's not that you can't or we can't, no one can. Even if you could choose funds that consistently outperformed, you still wouldn't meet your goals, because it really does. It has no bearing without the strategy overlay. Yeah. And the strategy overlay is, like you said, picking up tax dollars that you're paying for the ATO every year in the vicinity of $7,000 to $10,000. Making sure that your expenses are much less than what your income is, making sure that you can put money into your superannuation on each one of your final 260 fortnightly pay packets. It's the strategy overlay that gets you there.
Yeah. And that's a great way to think of it. A quote that I like is, outperformance is not a goal. And we think it is, and it's like anything. As an industry, we've got a lot of blame to take for that. Is that historically people go, I go to a financial advisor, I give him some money, he invests it, and he tries to beat the market, whatever that means. So, and as you say, if someone comes to me 10 years out from retirement and I get them an 11% return over the next 10 years, and the average market return was 10%, before I pat myself on the back too much, I really need to think, well, are they in the position that they need to be to retire? Are they going to run out of money before they pass away? Are they, those are all the issues that are what we would consider a goal or an objective to work towards, is making sure you have enough money to retire, not what percentage return or, what am I going to try and get in terms of that performance.
Fantastic point to finish up on, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Lighthouse Financial Advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.